Hey, amazing people. If you're subscribed, then you're a legend. Thank you so much. But most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please smash that sub button and join the family. We're almost at 30,000 subs, so let's make that happen. It's free and really means a lot to us. Thank you so much. Don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoy these stories.
I still don't know what made me say yes to Andy when he asked me out. I mean, I didn't even know the guy that well. We met a few times at the library. He was always there reading or flipping through books in the same section I was in. To be honest, I didn't think much of it at first. Just some random guy who probably wanted to talk books or something. But then one day he asked if I wanted to grab a coffee sometime. I said sure. Nothing serious, right? Just coffee. But that never happened. Instead, it turned into this whole weird thing that I'm still trying to make sense of. It started off fine, though. I was on my way home after a long day at class when I got a text from him. Hey, you still up for hanging out tonight? It felt casual enough, so I replied with a simple sure and agreed to meet at the local bar a few blocks down from my place. It wasn't a fancy spot, just one of those dive bars with neon signs, sticky floors, and an old jukebox in the corner. But hey, it was close and easy, so why not? I showed up about 15 minutes early, not expecting much. It was just a drink, right? And he was already there when I walked in, sitting at a table near the back, sipping something that looked like a gin and tonic. He smiled when he saw me, motioning for me to come over. He looked exactly like he did at the library. Tall, scruffy, with messy dark hair and glasses. But something about him was off. Maybe it was just me, but there was this energy around him that felt wrong. Still, I pushed it aside. It was probably nothing. I sat down and then we started talking, small stuff at first. School classes, random stuff. Nothing to get too excited about. And he asked me what I wanted to drink. I wasn't sure, but I just pointed to the first thing on the menu, some fruity cocktail. He nodded, ordered for me, and we kept talking. I was trying to be normal, not overthink things. It wasn't anything he said. It was the way he said things. Like when he'd compliment me, there was this weird hesitation behind his words. Or when he'd look at me, it felt too intense, like he was trying to figure me out. Eventually, the drinks came. I wasn't really thirsty, but I took the glass anyway, just to be polite. But before I even had a chance to sip, a guy at the next table over suddenly stood up, walked over, and slapped my drink right out of my hand. I barely had time to react as the glass hit the table and splashed all over the place. I looked up at the guy, confused, and he just stared at me for a second before turning to Andy. I saw you put something in her drink, the guy said. His voice was low, serious. My stomach dropped. I looked back at Andy, whose face had gone pale. He didn't even try to deny it. He just looked away, his eyes darting to the door like he wanted to bolt. The whole room felt like it froze. I didn't know what's happening, but everything in my body was telling me to get out. Fast. But before I could even say anything, the guy turned to me. You don't know him, do you? I shook my head, still not fully processing what's happening. What was in my drink? Was I being drugged? He must have seen the panic on my face because he motioned for me to follow him. Come with me, he said, his voice soft but firm. At that point, I didn't care what was going on or who he was. I just needed to get away from Andy. I grabbed my purse and followed the guy outside, into the cold night air. He led me to the side of the building where it was quieter. My head was spinning. What the hell was going on? The guy looked at me, and for the first time I realized he was probably a little older than me, maybe in his late 20s. He had short, messy hair and a worn leather jacket. He wasn't exactly a knight in shining armor, but I could tell he wasn't some creep. His eyes softened when he saw the look on my face. Look, I'm sorry for freaking you out. I saw him put something in your drink. I had to stop you before anything happened. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. What? What did he put in it? I don't know for sure, but it's not something you want to drink. Trust me. I didn't know what to say. I was still trying to process everything. Why had Andy done that? What was he planning? I felt this deep, gnawing unease settle in my gut. I wanted to go home to forget this whole mess, but something told me I couldn't let it go. Not now. I looked back at the bar, feeling like I needed to do something, but the guy gently placed a hand on my shoulder. Don't. I'm not saying you should be scared of him, but don't go back inside. Not tonight. There was a pause, and I thought about it. I was so confused, but he seemed like he knew what he was talking about. Andy had acted strange from the start, and now this. It was too much for me to just brush off. "I'll walk you home," the guy said like he was reading my mind. "We'll make sure you're safe." I didn't know what else to do, so I nodded. We started walking away from the bar, and I tried not to look back. I could feel the weight of the situation hanging in the air, and every step away from the place felt like I was escaping something I didn't fully understand. My head was racing, but I couldn't let it all settle yet, not while I was still so shaken. When we got to my place, I turned to thank him, but he was already walking away, disappearing into the night without another word. It was like he didn't want to stick around, like he had done his part and didn't need recognition. I never saw Andy again, and honestly, I didn't care. That night was enough to make me realize that not everyone who's friendly is actually friendly. I don't know what would have happened if that guy hadn't stepped in. I probably don't want to know, but I'm glad he did. So, I'm still trying to wrap my head around this one. I mean, what are the odds? You match with a girl on Hinge, think you're going on a nice, normal dinner date, and then end up in a situation where you're literally trying to push some gang member off of you while you're just trying to eat your steak. I can't even make this stuff up. It started out so simple, though. Tina seemed great on her profile. Cute smile, fun bio, and from what I could tell, we had a lot in common. She was into hiking, traveling, and of course, trying new food. I figured, hey, this could be the one. So, after a few days of texting back and forth, we made plans to meet up at this upscale steakhouse I'd been dying to try. The place wasn't overly fancy, but it wasn't a dive bar either. You know, the kind of place that has dim lighting and a good selection of wine. The kind of place where you go to have a relaxed but still nice time. I was feeling optimistic. I show up a little early like I always do, and a hostess leads me to the table. The place wasn't packed, so it was quiet and peaceful, perfect for a first date. I try to ignore how nervous I am. I mean, meeting someone in person after chatting online is always a bit weird, right? Especially since I'm one of those guys who overthinks everything. But then she walks in. Tina. Dan, she was even more gorgeous in person than in her photos. She had this effortless vibe, like she wasn't trying too hard, but still looked amazing. Her dark hair fell just past her shoulders, and she had this warm smile that immediately put me at ease. We said our hellos, and I pulled out her chair like a decent guy. She sat down, and we started talking. At first, everything was going fine. She was funny, easy to talk to, and the conversation flowed like we were old friends. We were laughing, joking around, the whole first date awkwardness melting away. The waiter came by, and we both ordered steaks. Medium rare, obviously. I wasn't about to get caught in a situation where I didn't know how to order steak properly. After he left, we kept talking. At some point, she mentioned her ex. I didn't think anything of it at first. I mean, it's a first date, right? It's normal to talk about stuff like that, right? But then she casually mentioned that she had just broken up with him 2 weeks ago. And as she said it, her tone shifted just a bit, like something wasn't quite right. She told me he was a complicated guy, and that they hadn't ended on the best terms. I didn't press too much, because who wants to talk about exes on a first date? But then she said something that made me freeze for a second. He's kind of involved in some dangerous stuff, she said, looking down at her menu like she wasn't sure whether she wanted to continue. Like, he's part of a gang. Okay, that's when I felt the first little hint of unease creeping in. I mean, what do you even say to that? Oh, cool, tell me more about the guy who's probably got connections I shouldn't mess with. I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to stay calm, but part of me was thinking that maybe I should just said, thanks, but no thanks, and dipped out right then and there. But I didn't. I stuck around, and we kept talking. Honestly, the night was still going well, until it wasn't. About an hour into dinner, I was mid-sentence, talking about some random thing that happened at work, when I noticed someone walk through the door. I didn't pay much attention at first, but then something about him caught my eye. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a leather jacket, and there was this energy about him, like he was looking for someone. His eyes scanned the room, and then they landed on our table, and that's when everything hit me like a ton of bricks. I saw Tina's face go completely pale. She tensed up and froze, her hand barely touching her glass. She didn't even look at me, she was staring at him. I didn't get it at first. I mean, why would she react like that? But then it clicked. This guy, the stranger who just walked in, was the guy she had been talking about. The guy who wasn't just an ex. He was the kind of ex with a whole I'm part of gang vibe. And sure enough, he started walking toward us. My stomach dropped. I'm not a fighter. I'm not a guy who wants to get involved in anything sketchy. And here I am sitting in front of this guy's ex who had warned me about him, and now he's coming straight for our table. He wasn't even trying to be subtle. It was like he knew exactly where she was, like he had tracked her down. I wish I could say I handled it better. I didn't. I froze for a second, just staring as he got closer. He didn't look happy. Hell, he looked pissed off. When he got to the table, he didn't say anything at first. He just grabbed my collar and yanked me out of my chair. I barely had time to react before he pushed me back against the table, knocking over my drink in the process. For a second, I thought I might pass out from fear. This guy was huge, and he had the kind of look that made you feel like you were about to get seriously hurt. But something kicked in, and I just shoved him off of me. Not thinking, just reacting. It wasn't much of a push, but it was enough to get him off my chest. That's when he started shouting. I'm not gonna lie. I didn't catch half of what he said. My brain was in full fight or flight mode. All I could think was that I needed to get the hell out of there. I looked at Tina, who was staring at her lap now like she didn't even want to be part of this anymore. At that point, I just stood up and backed away. I was shaking, don't get me wrong, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I grabbed my jacket, tossed some cash on the table, and bolted out of there. As I walked away from the restaurant, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting him to chase after me, but nothing happened. I didn't hear footsteps, and when I turned the corner, I didn't look back. That was the last time I ever talked to Tina. I never got the full story of what happened between them, and honestly, I don't want to know. I don't care. All I know is I was lucky I got out of there in one piece. That date could have ended a whole lot worse. It started like any other date, one of those classic, hey, we met online, let's grab a drink situations. I'd matched with Megan on this dating app, and after a few days of chatting, we decided to meet up. She seemed cool, good sense of humor, decent taste in music, and we had a lot of common interests. Nothing out of the ordinary. We agreed to meet at this cozy little bar in town. One of those places with a dimly lit interior, wooden tables, and the kind of low-key vibe that's perfect for a first date. Nothing too fancy, but not a dive bar either. When I showed up, I was already feeling a little nervous. I mean, first dates are always a bit weird, right? You never really know if the chemistry you had online will carry over into real life. But when I saw Megan, I was relieved. She looked just like her photos, tall with dark brown hair and a warm smile. She was easy to talk to, and after a few minutes, I started to relax. At first, it seemed totally normal. We were chatting about random stuff, like how our day had gone, what movies we liked, and the usual first date banter. I was starting to think, okay, this might actually turn into something. But as the night wore on, something started to feel off. She knew a lot about me, way more than I thought she should. I mean, yeah, we'd been chatting online, but there were some things she was mentioning that I hadn't told her. Little details here and there, like my favorite kind of pizza or how I like to spend my weekends. Stuff that seemed way too personal to come from our brief conversations. But I brushed it off, thinking maybe she was just good at reading people or had picked up on stuff from my social media. But then she started bringing up stuff that was just strange. She mentioned a date we had. But here's the thing, I had no memory of any date with her before. Not even a little. I tried to play it cool, like I was just misremembering, but inside, I was starting to feel like something wasn't right. It wasn't even just the date she was talking about. She started referring to random conversations we supposedly had, conversations that I had zero recollection of. She knew about my work, my family, even about a trip I'd mentioned taking months ago. I couldn't figure out how she knew all this stuff. I mean, I hadn't told her half of it. The more she talked, the more I felt like I was trapped in some kind of weird, twisted déjà vu. Every time I tried to steer the conversation to something neutral, she'd find a way to bring it back to things I hadn't told her, things that made me uncomfortable. It wasn't just that she was familiar with my life. It was like she was too familiar, like she had somehow been there for things I couldn't remember. And then came the moment that made my stomach drop completely. She leaned forward in her seat, looking directly at me with this intense focus, and said, "Remember that night we went to that little Italian restaurant? You had a lasagna and I tried the gnocchi. You told me your mom makes the best lasagna, but you never really gave me a clear answer about why you don't talk to her much." Now, if I had been drinking more, maybe I would have chalked it up to the alcohol. But I wasn't drunk, not by any means. I didn't even know how to react. I stared at her, trying to figure out what was going on. I'd never in my life been to an Italian restaurant with her or anyone for that matter, let alone talked about my mom's lasagna. I mean, yeah, I don't talk to my mom much, but that's because we have some complicated family stuff, and I definitely never talked about it with Megan. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just some weird coincidence or misunderstanding. Maybe she was talking about another guy she dated, and the details just got mixed up. But then she kept going, more details, more things that were just too specific to be random. She knew all the time I got stuck in traffic on the way to a concert last year. She even knew that I'd recently gotten a new laptop, even though I hadn't mentioned it to anyone except a couple of friends. At this point, I wasn't even pretending to enjoy the date anymore. I felt like I was in some kind of nightmare and I couldn't figure out what was going on. Was she a stalker? Did she somehow track me down and memorize every little detail of my life? Or was this some kind of sick joke? I honestly didn't know what to think. All I could do was sit there, staring at her, my mind racing. I tried to change the subject, talking about something completely random, just to see if she'd latch onto it. But she didn't take the bait. Instead, she said, "I remember when you told me about your cousin's wedding. You said it was awkward because your ex was there with her new boyfriend, right? You were kind of a wreck the whole time." That was it. That's when I couldn't keep it in anymore. My brain just kind of snapped. I hadn't talked about my ex in months. And the wedding? I'd only mentioned it in passing to a couple of close friends, not to some girl I had just met. And definitely not in the detail that she was describing it. I don't know what happened next. I don't remember the exact moment I stood up, but I know I left that bar faster than I'd ever left anywhere before. I didn't even say goodbye, didn't even think about the drinks we still had sitting on the table. I just grabbed my coat, walked out into the cold night air, and kept walking. I didn't turn around to look. I didn't want to know if she was following me or if she was still sitting there, smiling like nothing had happened. I don't know if she was some kind of stalker, or if she was delusional, or if she was just playing some twisted game. But I couldn't deal with it anymore. I needed to get away from her, from whatever the hell that was. I haven't heard from Megan since that night. I blocked her on everything and deleted my dating profile, figuring I'd be safer that way. Honestly, though, I still don't know what happened. Every time I think about it, I get a little freaked out. How could she know all of that about me? How could she remember things I never even told her? I still don't have an answer. And honestly, I don't think I want one. It's funny how you can feel like everything's going right, and then in a split second, it all falls apart. That's exactly how I felt the night I met Liam. What was supposed to be this sweet, laid-back dinner turned into, well, something else. Something I never ever saw coming. And trust me, I wish I could forget it. So, here's how it went. I met Liam through a dating app like most people do these days. We'd been talking for a few weeks, and honestly, I was kind of excited. He seemed normal, decent, nothing out of the ordinary. I mean, I've been on enough awkward dates to know what to expect, but this one felt different. The guy had a way with words, and he seemed super easygoing. He suggested this small bistro downtown that I hadn't been to before, and I thought, why not? It sounded chill. I get to the restaurant, and it's one of those spots that's cozy but not overly fancy, wooden tables, low lighting, a little bit of a rustic vibe. I'm not gonna lie, I was a little nervous, but it was more of that first date nervousness where you're excited to see how it all pans out. He was already there when I walked in, sitting at a corner table, looking just like his photos. Tall, decent looking, dressed casual, but not sloppy. We exchanged a couple of awkward hellos, but nothing too bad. He made me laugh almost instantly. That was good, right? At least that was how I saw it. The waiter came by right away to take our drink orders. I ordered a wine. Nothing too crazy, just a glass of red. Liam ordered a beer. All was fine at first. We chatted about everything, what we did, where we were from, and Liam walked right up to the waiter, who, by the way, looked like he was in his early 20s, and before I could even process what was happening, I saw Liam slap the poor guy across the face. I don't think anyone else saw it coming, but I definitely did. My mouth went dry, and I had to blink twice because it didn't make sense to me at first. What just happened? Why did he do that? The waiter, completely stunned, froze for a second, his hand on his cheek. Then he took a deep breath like he was trying to stay calm, but I could tell he was visibly shaken. He started backing away slowly, clearly uncomfortable, but also confused. It was like he didn't even know how to react. I sat there completely frozen in place. what was going on. This wasn't the guy I've been talking to all this time. What happened to the chill, easygoing Liam I had been messaging? Liam was still standing there fuming. I could see his face getting redder and redder, and his fists were clenched. I had no idea what was going on, but I definitely wasn't about to sit there and pretend it wasn't happening. I stood up, trying to make sense of the situation, but it was like he didn't even see me anymore. A few seconds later, the restaurant manager and a couple of security guards appeared, rushing over. They didn't waste time. I was still standing there, not sure what to do or say, and the guards were immediately talking to Liam, trying to calm him down. It didn't work. Liam was yelling at them, saying something about how they couldn't treat him like that, how he was a paying customer. The whole place had gotten really tense, and I could feel people's eyes on me. I wish I could say I handled it better, but honestly, I was completely in shock. I didn't know what to do or what to say. Should I apologize for him? Should I leave? Did I even want to be around this guy anymore? None of it made sense. Security ended up escorting Liam out. They had him by each arm, walking him towards the door, and honestly, it was like they were moving a wild animal. I couldn't believe this was happening. I looked at the waiter again, who was still standing there, now rubbing his cheek and looking at me. I was too embarrassed to meet his eyes for long. I stayed in the restaurant for a few minutes, trying to collect myself. The waiter was really nice about it, though. He didn't seem to blame me. He told me he hoped I was okay and that I didn't have to pay for the meal if I didn't want to. But I felt like I needed to leave. I felt sick to my stomach. As I walked out of the restaurant, I couldn't stop replaying everything in my head. What just happened? Was I the crazy one for being confused or upset? But no, I knew I wasn't. There was no reason for Lamb to act like that, and I wasn't about to let his outburst ruin my night. By the time I got home, I was still shaking. I thought about texting him, maybe asking if he was okay, maybe trying to figure out what had caused him to snap, but in my gut, I knew I was done. There was no way I could go on a second date with someone who would lose it over something so minor. That wasn't just a red flag, it was a full-blown warning sign. So, I blocked him. Not even, hey, sorry, this isn't working text, just a straight-up block. Some people you just know are better off staying out of your life. This was one of those times. And as I sat on my couch that night, all I could think was that I'd had my first and last date with Liam. What a disaster. I swear to you, I never expected my first date with Sally to end the way it did. I mean, you hear about awkward dates and cringy moments, but this was on a whole different level. It started off fine, normal even, but then things went south so fast, I didn't even have time to process what was happening. So let's rewind a bit. I met Sally on this dating app, you know, the kind where you swipe left or right and you both hope for the best. Her profile seemed pretty chill, and she had a few cute pictures. She was into music, movies, and food. I mean, who isn't? We started chatting and quickly realized we had some things in common. Both liked trying new restaurants, enjoyed a good movie marathon, and had a weird sense of humor. Everything seemed fine, so we decided to meet up in person. We agreed on this small Italian place downtown. Not too fancy, but cozy enough to make it feel like a legit date. I got there a little early, as I tend to do, and found a table near the window. I already picked out my outfit, jeans, a button-up shirt, and some fresh sneakers, trying to look just the right amount of casual but put together. Sally arrived about 10 minutes after me, looking cute in a simple dress. She smiled when she saw me, and we hugged. It wasn't anything too awkward, just a normal, hey, nice to meet you in person vibe. We sat down, ordered some food, and started chatting. At first, it was all pretty typical, talking about our jobs, hobbies, and random stuff that people ask on dates. I thought we were getting along. She seemed pretty relaxed, and I felt like maybe I wasn't going to mess this one up. We were talking about music at one point, and I mentioned how I liked a lot of different genres, from classic rock to some indie stuff. And then Sally started going on about how much she loved pop music, especially Katy Perry. Now, I'm not going to lie, I'm not a big fan of Katy Perry. I mean, she has some catchy songs, sure, but I've always thought her music was a bit childish. It's not that I hate it, but it just doesn't vibe with me. So, as casually as I could, I said something like, yeah, I don't really get the whole Katy Perry thing. Her songs feel kind of childish to me, honestly. I didn't think much of it. I didn't think it was a huge deal to say that. It was just my opinion, right? I was just talking about music. But holy crap, did that set something off. The whole mood at the table changed in an instant. Sally's face went from smiling to, well, let's just say it wasn't smiling anymore. She started to look really tense, her jaw kind of tightening up. It was like I just kicked a puppy or something. I tried to backtrack a little, saying something like, I mean, I get why people like her, it's just not my thing. But it was already too late. Sally wasn't having it. She gave me this cold look, and before I could even figure out what was going on, she just spat in my face. Like, full on, no hesitation, a big old wad of spit, right across my cheek. I sat there blinking for a second, not even sure if what had just happened was real. I wasn't mad. I wasn't angry either. I was just stunned. I felt the wetness on my cheek. I could actually feel my brain trying to catch up with what had just occurred. Did she really just spit on me over Katy Perry? The whole restaurant seemed to quiet down. I could feel people glancing at us from their tables and my face flushed with embarrassment. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to get up and walk out, but another part of me just wanted to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. Maybe I was misreading the whole thing. But no, I wasn't misreading it. She just looked at me like I'd personally offended her, like my opinion on a pop star was a personal attack. She didn't say anything, she didn't apologize. She just stared me down, her arms crossed tightly. It was like she was daring me to say something, and I didn't know what to do. I had no idea how to react. So I wiped the spit off my face with a napkin, still sitting there in total shock. The waiter came over to check on us, looking uncomfortable. I don't blame him, this was definitely not the usual date vibe. I wanted to say something, anything, but I couldn't. My head was spinning. Why did she react like this? Was it really because of a freaking Katy Perry comment? I mean, I wasn't trying to insult her taste in music. But there I was, sitting in this small restaurant, in front of a crowd of strangers with a spit-streaked face. I finally said something like, that was uncalled for, trying to keep it cool, but she didn't respond. She didn't even seem to care. She just turned her head away like she was done with me. It was so strange. I'd been on a few awkward dates before, but nothing like this. Nothing that made me feel so trapped. I paid for my half of the meal because, honestly, I didn't even want to stick around any longer. Sally didn't try to talk to me, didn't try to apologize. She just got up and walked out. I wasn't about to chase her down. I didn't want to talk to her anymore. I sat there for a while after she left, just staring at the table. My head was still spinning, and I could hear the quiet chatter of the other people around me, probably gossiping about the crazy date they'd just witnessed. I felt humiliated, not because of what she'd done, but because I had no idea how to handle it. I wasn't expecting a reaction like that. And to be honest, I still don't fully understand why she reacted the way she did. I left the restaurant feeling a mix of confusion, embarrassment, and disbelief. I didn't text her after that, and I didn't hear from her again either. I didn't block her, but I figured, what was the point? If someone's going to spit in your face because you don't like the same pop songs as them, they're not worth trying to salvage anything with. To this day, I think about that night and just shake my head. I mean, it's not like I said anything that crazy right. But here we are, and I'll never look at pop music or dating the same way again. It's funny how a nice, normal dinner can go from being just a chill night out to something you'll never forget. I had no clue that when I met David for dinner, I'd end up feeling completely violated and honestly freaked out. I should have known something was off the moment he walked in. But of course I didn't. I met David through a mutual friend, and he seemed pretty cool. We chatted a bit online before, and he was charming, laid back. He suggested a nice Italian place I'd never been to before, and I figured it was a good way to get to know each other better. So I agreed. I had nothing to lose. The place was small but classy, the kind of spot that doesn't scream fancy, but you can tell they care about the details. The atmosphere was cozy, low lighting, soft jazz playing in the background. When David arrived, he looked just like his photos. Tall, decent looking, and dressed pretty casually, but not like he rolled out of bed. We exchanged a polite greeting, and the night started off fine. We were chatting about random stuff, work, hobbies, places we've been. Nothing out of the ordinary. The waiter came by, took our orders, and it was all going smoothly. I remember the meal was pretty good. I had a spaghetti dish, and David went for something with seafood. The conversation was flowing well enough, and we were both in good spirits. But as the meal went on, I started to notice some small things that felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but little red flags were starting to pop up. It wasn't anything big, just weird things. Like when the waiter came by with a check, David insisted on picking it up, even though we hadn't even discussed who was going to pay. I thought it was a bit odd, but whatever. It's a nice gesture, right? Plus, he seemed to want to impress me. When the waiter left, I put my hand in my bag, expecting to pull out my wallet and maybe toss some cash for the tip. But when I went to grab it, it wasn't there. I froze. My wallet was gone. At first, I thought maybe I had left it in the car or at home, but I knew I'd put it in my bag when I left. Panic started creeping in, but I didn't want to make a scene, so I kept calm. I searched my bag again, hoping maybe I had missed it, but nope, nothing. David seemed to notice my sudden panic. He asked if everything was okay, and I told him my wallet was missing. He immediately offered to help me search for it, which was nice, but I was already feeling uneasy. It didn't make sense. Where could it have gone? We checked under the table, the chairs, even the floor around us, but there was no sign of it. The whole time, David kept reassuring me that it would turn up. He suggested we go back to the front of the restaurant and ask if anyone had seen it. I was hesitant but went along with it. Maybe I was just overthinking things. Still, something about the situation was making my stomach turn. We got to the front, and I asked the hostess if anyone had turned in a wallet. She shook her head. But then David, who was standing a little too close to me at this point, suggested I check the restroom. Maybe it had fallen out when I had been in there earlier. Now, I'll admit I felt a little silly. I was running through all the possibilities in my head. Maybe I had dropped it in the restroom and just didn't remember. But as I walked toward the back, I couldn't shake this feeling that something wasn't right. It wasn't just the missing wallet anymore. It was the way David was acting. He wasn't panicking like I was, but there was a certain calmness to his demeanor that felt rehearsed, almost like he had been through this routine before. When I came back, I checked my phone. It was a reflex. I opened my banking app mostly to check if there were any unusual transactions while I was out. And that's when I felt the blood drain from my face. My bank account was empty. Every last dollar was gone. I couldn't breathe. How was that even possible? I hadn't used my card for anything else that night. I immediately started scrolling through my recent transactions, but everything seemed normal, until I saw a charge for a large amount just a few minutes ago. The time on the transaction was right when I had been looking for my wallet. My hands started shaking as I tried to figure out what was going on. David was still standing there, looking calm as ever. He noticed me staring at my phone and asked what was wrong. I didn't even know how to answer him. All I could do was show him the screen. He stared at it for a second before giving me this reassuring smile. "Hey, it's fine," he said. "I'll take care of the bill. Don't worry about it." I should walk out right then and there, but I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe it was the embarrassment. Maybe it was a hope that I was just overreacting. I mean, this could just be some weird coincidence, right? But my gut told me something else. The hostess came over to us, and she seemed a little too familiar with David. She said, "Oh, David, you're back again tonight. I see you brought someone new this time." It was strange that she knew his name so quickly, but I brushed it off at first. But then she kept talking. "You've been coming here for a while now, haven't you? I swear, you're here more than anyone else." Her voice was light, almost like she was joking, but there was something in her tone that caught me off guard. It wasn't exactly friendly, more like resigned. David didn't say anything, but his expression shifted just for a second. It was like he was hiding something, and that's when I started putting things together. This wasn't a coincidence. I wasn't just unlucky. He had been doing this before. This wasn't the first time. I realized that David had been targeting me. My wallet wasn't missing. I had taken it. He drained my account before I even had a chance to notice, and now he was trying to act like the knight in shining armor, offering to pay for everything. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The overly calm demeanor, the insistence on paying, the way he seemed to know everyone at the restaurant. It was all a setup. I didn't stay another minute. I bolted out of there as quickly as I could, and while I was still in shock, I managed to block his number and report the fraud to my bank. I don't know how many people David had done this to. I was no longer going to be one of them. That nice dinner had turned into a nightmare I wouldn't soon forget. I remember the first time I met Rachel. I had seen her on social media a few times, and we had exchanged a few texts, but meeting in person was a whole different vibe. We decided to grab dinner at this cozy little place on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just a chill spot with dim lighting and good food. The kind of place where you can actually hear each other talk without yelling over some loud music. It wasn't too crowded, but it wasn't empty either. People around, some quiet chatter, and the clink of silverware. It felt normal, but honestly, it didn't stay that way for long. Right from the start, something felt off. You know how you meet someone, and everything seems fine, but there's just this weird vibe lingering in the air. That's how I felt. It wasn't that she was rude or anything. She was actually pretty charming. She smiled a lot, made small talk, and asked questions. But there was something else. It was like she was distracted. Her eyes kept flicking to her phone like every few minutes, almost like she was waiting for something. I tried not to let it bug me at first, but it started to gnaw at me. She'd answer a text, put the phone down for a second, and then glance at it again. I noticed it because she'd do it almost every minute, and every time her phone buzzed, she'd sort of tense up like she was bracing herself for bad news. At one point, I saw her hands tremble when she typed something back. She kept it hidden, but I caught a glimpse of her screen. That was the first time I saw the number. A random, unsaved number that didn't look familiar at all. I thought nothing of it at first. People get messages from all kinds of numbers. But it kept happening. After the third or fourth time, I couldn't ignore it anymore. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. She'd glance at the phone, swipe something, and then check it again. Every few minutes. And I didn't want to seem weird, but it started to get uncomfortable. I mean, we were having dinner, and she was more to the messages than me. At one point, she excused herself to the bathroom, and I finally got a look at her phone, resting on the table. My curiosity got the best of me. I wasn't trying to invade her privacy, but something just didn't sit right with me. It was one of those moments where I thought, maybe this is nothing. But then I saw it. The text thread from that same number. The first message read, "Are you with him?" I froze. It wasn't just a random message. There was something strange about it. The words didn't seem casual, they seemed urgent. Almost like the person on the other end knew something I didn't. My eyes were glued to the screen as I scrolled up a little further. The next one was even weirder. "Don't trust him." I felt my stomach twist. I don't know why, but it felt personal, like I was on the target. I wasn't even sure what to think. I mean, maybe it was a joke, or someone trying to mess with her. But what kind of joke is that? Rachel came back before I could process it, and I quickly put the phone back down, hoping she hadn't noticed. She didn't, but she picked it up a second later, checking her phone again before sliding it into her purse. She didn't say anything about the messages, but her eyes flickered almost like she was trying to act normal. It was too obvious, though. It was like she was trying too hard to be calm. The rest of the dinner felt off. She'd laugh, but it didn't sound as genuine as before. I'd ask her questions, and she'd answer, but her responses were short, almost like she was half listening to me. When the waiter came to take our plates, she glanced at her phone again. I swear, the moment the waiter walked away, she had it back out. I could feel my irritation building, but I didn't say anything. It felt wrong, like I shouldn't have even been looking at her phone in the first place. So I kept my mouth shut. But something kept nagging at me, that feeling of being watched. That weird, almost creepy vibe that I couldn't shake off. I had just about convinced myself to not worry about it when Rachel said she needed to head out. She seemed kind of flustered, almost like she was in a rush. She grabbed her purse, but then, without thinking, handed me her phone to hold while she put on her jacket. It was instinctive. She had no idea. But when I held the phone, I felt like a sudden coldness hit me. I didn't mean to, but I saw the screen. The same number again. And I swear it wasn't just me. She was practically shaking as she grabbed the phone back from my hand, tucking it into her purse like she couldn't get it out of sight fast enough. Something was seriously wrong. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me, her eyes wide, almost like she was pleading with me not to ask. And honestly, I couldn't think of anything else to say. I had no idea what to even ask, what to make of it. It felt like a mess of questions and confusion, but I didn't want to push. So I said goodbye, walked her to her car, and that was it. I tried not to think about it. I figured maybe I was reading too much into it. But that night when I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about the messages. My mind wouldn't let it go. What did they mean? Who was this person texting her? It didn't take long to find out. The next morning, I did a quick search on her number. Nothing came up. But then I thought of something. If it wasn't her number, maybe I could find out who it belonged to by looking up the area code. And that's when I found something that made my stomach drop. The number was tied to an old, abandoned account. One from her ex. The one who had been stalking her. He had been sending those messages for months. I should have known, should have connected the dots, but I was too wrapped up in the date to think about it. Rachel had been trying to keep it under control, trying to avoid the situation blowing up. But clearly it was way worse than I thought. I should have seen it earlier. I should have known. I can't even begin to describe how weird my first date with Randy was. Honestly, if I hadn't lived through it myself, I wouldn't believe anyone else who told me about it. It started like any other date with a simple dinner at a local bar. The plan was to meet, grab some food, talk, and see if we clicked. But nothing could have prepared me for what actually happened. I met Randy on one of those dating apps, where you just swipe left or right based on pictures and a short bio. He seemed normal enough, had a few decent photos, said he liked to go hiking, and enjoyed watching TV shows. He didn't seem overly intense or anything, so when he suggested we go to this small pub downtown, I thought, sure, why not? I showed a little early as usual and grabbed a seat near the bar. The place was kind of dim with low lighting and a mix of regulars scattered around. It wasn't fancy, but it had that homey vibe, and I liked that. Randy walked in a few minutes later, looking pretty much like his photos. He was tall, dark hair, wearing a casual t-shirt with some sports team logo on it and jeans. He waved at me and I waved back, feeling a little bit of excitement. It had been a while since I'd been on a date. He came over, and we exchanged some awkward small talk at first, the how'd your day been? And what do you do for work? Stuff. The vibe seemed fine, nothing out of the ordinary. But then he started talking about wrestling. Like, all of a sudden, in the middle of a casual conversation, he just dove deep into wrestling. I didn't know what to do with it. I've never been into wrestling, and I didn't really know what to say, so I just kind of nodded along, trying to be polite. But the more he talked, the more it seemed like it was the only thing on his mind. He was going on and on about the history of wrestling like he had watched every single match ever. At first, I thought he was just passionate about it, and maybe I could make an effort to engage. But no, it didn't stop. It was like every sentence somehow led back to wrestling. He started talking about his favorite moves, how he loved watching old pay-per-view events, and how he could totally see himself as a wrestler if he pursued it. I tried to steer the conversation back to something normal, like work or movies, but no, it was all about wrestling. I tried to laugh it off, thinking it was just one of those weird quirks people sometimes have. But then it started getting strange. He mentioned he had a signature move that he was really proud of. I laughed awkwardly, unsure of how to respond, but that didn't stop him. He started demonstrating it in the chair, getting up from the table and pretending to slam his imaginary opponent. The whole thing was weird and uncomfortable, but I tried to brush it off because, hey, everyone has their thing, right? Then came the real shocker. We were about halfway through our drinks when Randy suddenly stood up and announced, I'm going to show you the tombstone move. I thought he was joking, like maybe throw me a high five or do some weird playful dance. But no, without warning, he grabbed me by the waist and lifted me up. I didn't even have time to react before he was holding me upside down like I was a rag doll. I felt my head rush to my stomach as I was flipped over. My heart stopped for a second. I had no idea what was happening. I wasn't even sure if I should be laughing or panicking. But in that split second, I realized this wasn't some kind of fun, quirky date moment. This was a full-on wrestling move, and I had no control over it. Randy, who had clearly gotten way too caught up in his weird passion for wrestling, was holding me like I was about to be slammed into the ground. And I could feel people around us starting to notice. I was frozen in shock. I was trying to figure out if I should say something or do something, but nothing felt real. I couldn't process it fast enough. He held me up for what felt like an eternity, grinning like he was proud of himself. The few people around the bar were starting to stare, and I could hear a couple of them laughing, but I wasn't sure if they thought it was funny or if they were just uncomfortable too. The whole thing was surreal. Finally, Randy set me down, gently I guess, but I still felt like I was spinning. I staggered back, trying to regain my balance. I was dizzy, my heart racing, and I couldn't even form a coherent thought. I felt humiliated. It was like I was trapped in some bad sitcom, except I wasn't laughing. Randy stood there with this goofy grin on his face, like he had just accomplished some kind of great achievement. He asked, "Wasn't that awesome?" And I just stared at him, completely speechless. I couldn't even process what had just happened. I wasn't hurt or anything, but it was such a bizarre, out-of-nowhere thing that I didn't know what to do. My mind was reeling. I stood there trying to act like I wasn't completely freaking out, but honestly, I was. People at the bar were still watching, and I just wanted to disappear. I grabbed my purse, got up, and told Randy I needed a minute to catch my breath. I walked straight to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and just sat there for a few minutes, trying to calm myself down. I could hear the buzzing of people outside, probably still talking about what had just happened. I couldn't believe it. This wasn't some cute, awkward moment where I'd laugh it off later. It was disturbing. It was borderline assault, and the fact that he thought it was funny made it worse. I stayed in the bathroom longer than I probably should have, but when I finally went back out, Randy was sitting at the table smiling as if everything was fine. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my things, told him I wasn't feeling well, and left. I don't even remember driving home because I was in such shock. All I could think was, how did this happen? I never texted Randy again. I didn't block him, but I didn't need to. The whole date had left me feeling like I was in the middle of some weird dream I couldn't wake up from. And honestly, I'll never look at wrestling the same way again. It was one of those dates that seemed perfectly normal at first, one of those casual, let's hang out kinds of things. Jake and I had been talking for a couple of weeks, mostly through text. Nothing fancy, just regular small talk. He was funny, easygoing, and seemed like a pretty chill guy. We didn't want anything too serious at first, but we'd agreed to meet up. When Jake suggested we go to a small gathering at his place, I thought it'd be a nice change. He said it was going to be a relaxed evening, just some friends hanging out, playing games, and having drinks. Seemed harmless enough, right? A casual little meet-up with some new people to get to know each other better. The first weird thing happened as soon as I walked in. The moment I stepped inside Jake's apartment, I was hit with this weird vibe. You know when you walk into a room and the mood just feels off, even though everyone's smiling and pretending things are fine. That was it. Jake's friends were all sitting around the living room, but they didn't seem as welcoming as I expected. They were just staring at me. I mean, it wasn't overtly hostile or anything. They weren't glaring at me or anything dramatic, but there was this uncomfortable quietness to them. They weren't really talking, just sort of watching me with these intense eyes, like they were trying to figure me out or something. Jake didn't seem to notice, or maybe he did and just brushed it off. He greeted me with a smile, led me to the couch, and introduced me to a couple of his friends, but they just gave me these awkward nods and didn't say much. I felt like I was the only one trying to keep the conversation going, while they just watched me with those weird, quiet expressions. As the night went on, I started to feel more and more uncomfortable. The silence wasn't the kind of uncomfortable silence that you sometimes get when you're with strangers. It felt deliberate, like they were waiting for something. Every time I tried to talk to someone, it felt like they were almost humoring me, but not really engaging. It was like they were all in on something that I wasn't. And then Jake excused himself. He said he'd be back in a bit, but didn't give much of an explanation. He didn't ask if I was okay or if I wanted to come with him. He just got up and left me sitting there, in the middle of a group of people who barely seemed to acknowledge me. I sat there for a while, just sipping my drink, trying to think of something to say, but I was starting to feel like I had made a huge mistake. The group had become even quieter once Jake left. I could hear the occasional murmur between a couple of them, but it wasn't like any of them were making an effort to include me in the conversation. I just sat there feeling like the odd one out. Then someone, probably one of Jake's friends I hadn't met yet, finally broke the silence. He asked me how I was doing. I gave the usual response, saying I was doing fine, just enjoying the night. And then, just when I thought maybe the awkwardness would lift a little, things took a turn. One of the other friends, a girl I hadn't really talked to, asked me about my job. It seemed like a normal question at first, but the way she asked it, it was almost too specific, like she already knew the answer. She asked about my work schedule, what kind of projects I was involved in, and how long I'd been with the company. I answered, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. After a couple of minutes, another person joined in. It started off as casual, but then they started asking more personal questions. What do you do for fun on weekends? Do you like to go hiking or do anything outdoors? What was the last vacation you went on? Again, nothing super weird on the surface, but something about the questions didn't feel right. They weren't just getting to know me. They were digging into my life, almost like they already knew the answers, like they were testing me. I gave them the benefit of the doubt at first, thinking maybe I was overthinking it. But then the questions got even stranger. Someone asked if I'd ever been to that specific park near my house. You know, the one by the lake. It's really nice to walk around there, they said. I hesitated for a moment because I didn't remember mentioning that park to anyone, but I just brushed it off, answering that yes, I had been there a few times. But then they asked something else. What time of day do you usually go? Mornings or afternoons? Now I was really starting to feel unsettled. It was starting to feel less like a friendly conversation and more like an interrogation, like they were trying to see if my answers matched up with what they already knew. I gave short answers, trying not to give away too much, but it was clear they were pushing for more. The more I looked around, the more I realized just how odd everyone was acting. There was something off in the way they spoke, in the way they looked at me. I started noticing small details, like the fact that none of them seemed to blink as much as normal, or how they were always just a little too quiet, like they were waiting for me to say something wrong. I tried to get up and find Jake, but I felt I was being watched the moment I moved. I walked toward the hallway, but just before I could turn the corner, someone stepped in front of me. It was Jake's friend, the guy who had been asking me all those personal questions. He gave me this weird smile like he knew something I didn't, and told me to sit down. That's when I realized something. I had just met these people tonight. They'd been following me for longer than I thought. I didn't know how, but it all clicked. The questions, the way they knew things about me without me ever telling them. It wasn't just coincidence. They'd been keeping tabs on me, watching me from afar, gathering information about my life. They knew things that only someone who had been following me would know. I don't remember how I managed to get out of there, but I remember running into Jake on my way out the door. He looked surprised, like he had no idea what had just happened. But I could see it in his eyes. He knew exactly what was going on. I didn't stick around to ask questions. I just left, and I never went back. It was a while before I realized how deep it really went. But even now, when I think about it, I'm not sure what scared me more. That they were watching me, or that they knew I would eventually show up there. I mean, when you meet someone online, you don't exactly expect fireworks, but everything out the way Steven acted should have raised red flags. But no, I ignored the gut feeling and decided to go for it anyway. One bad decision after another, right? It started out pretty normal, or at least as normal as a first date could be. We met at a little cafe downtown that had an artsy, cozy vibe. There was some acoustic music playing in the background, and it was one of those places where you could easily get lost in conversation. I figured it would be a chill hangout, just getting to know someone new. And honestly, at first it was. Steven seemed like an easygoing guy. He had that friendly, approachable vibe about him. He asked me about my day, my work, hobbies, the usual. He told me about his life too, but there was this strange edge to the way he spoke. It wasn't anything overt, just little things. Like how he would pause in between sentences, almost like he was carefully picking his words. Or how he seemed to memorize details about me, my favorite movies, the places I like to go, the way I took my coffee. I didn't think much of it at first, thinking he was just being attentive, which I guess isn't a bad thing, right? The more I talked to him, the more I started noticing how observant he was. He would watch my reactions closely when I talked about certain things. It was subtle but off-putting. But I pushed that thought aside because, again, I didn't want to come off as paranoid. After we finished our drinks, he suggested we walk around the nearby park, which sounded nice enough. It was a beautiful evening, not too hot, not too cold. We strolled for a while, talking more about random stuff. He asked me what kind of music I liked, what books I read, where I grew up, just the usual icebreaker questions. But again, there was something about the way he asked those questions that felt off, like he already knew the answers and was just waiting for me to say them. The thing that really started making me uncomfortable, though, was how close he would get when he talked, like too close. At one point, as we were walking past the fountain, he just stopped and turned to me, suddenly standing way too close. I thought he was going to kiss me or something, but instead, he just smiled this soft, unsettling smile. And it wasn't a normal smile. It was the kind that lingered just a little too long. I pulled back a little, making some excuse about needing to head home soon, and we started walking again. The whole time, I had this nagging feeling at the back of my mind that something wasn't quite right. We ended up back at his car, parked near the entrance of the park. I felt a weird sense of relief when he opened the door for me. At that point, the evening had just felt like a blur of awkward conversation and moments that didn't sit right, but I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Maybe I was overthinking things, right? Before I could get in the car, Stephen handed me a small wrapped box. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple gift wrapped in plain paper. My first thought was that it was probably just something small, maybe a joke gift or something he picked up for fun. But when he handed it to me, there was a look in his eyes, like he was watching me closely, waiting for my reaction. I looked at the box, not really sure what to do with it. "What's this?" I asked, already feeling a little nervous. He just smiled that same weird smile. "Just open it," he said, his voice softer than usual. I took the box from him, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. My hands were a little shaky as I peeled away the wrapping paper, and when I finally opened it, I froze. Inside the box was a small lock of hair. It wasn't anything I recognized. It was brown, maybe a little lighter than my hair, and tied with a tiny ribbon. And there was a note next to it, folded up neatly. My heart started racing as I picked it up and unfolded it. The note read, "I've been waiting for this moment." I didn't know what to say. My mind was running a million miles per second, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. Why was there a lock of hair in a gift box? Why was he giving it to me? I looked up at Stephen, my mouth dry. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. My mind was just scrambled. He was watching me, his eyes gleaming with that same odd look. "Stephen, what does this mean?" I managed to ask, my voice shaking. My hands were still holding the box, but I felt like I wanted to throw it as far away from me as possible. He didn't answer right away. He just stood there, smiling that faint smile. It was like he was savoring the moment, like he had been waiting for me to ask. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "I've been collecting things like this from everyone I meet." I blinked, not fully understanding. "What do you mean? Why?" His smile didn't fade. "I keep little things that remind me of people. It's a collection." He shrugged like it was the most normal thing in the world. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't just some girl he met on a date. I wasn't even someone he was interested in getting to know better. I had become another item in his collection. My stomach turned. I suddenly felt sick to my core. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the box. He had been collecting things from people, locks of hair, probably other personal items too. I didn't know how long it had been going on, how many other people had been a part of his strange obsession. But I was just another piece in whatever twisted collection he was building. I didn't know how to react. I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing. Should I confront him? Should I run? I couldn't stand there any longer. Without saying another word, I dropped the box and ran to my car. I didn't even look back to see if he was following me. I didn't care. I left that night shaken, terrified, and confused. I didn't know how deep his obsession went, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to be his next collection anymore. I should have bailed when she mentioned her partner. Looking back, that was the first sign that something wasn't right. I mean, who shows up to a first date with someone they're supposedly interested in and talks about their partner like it's no big deal? But I didn't want to be rude, and I didn't want to overthink it, so I brushed it off. I thought maybe I'm just being paranoid. It started off like any normal first date. I met Lily at a small, cozy Italian restaurant downtown. The kind of place where the lights are dim and the checkered floors give it an old school charm. We'd been texting for a while, and I was excited to meet her. She seemed sweet, funny, and had this vibe that felt warm, like she was easy to talk to. We sat down at a small table near the window, and for the first half hour, everything was going smoothly. The conversation was light. We talked about work, hobbies, stupid stuff like favorite foods, and weird childhood memories. But then, just as I was starting to feel like maybe this day could turn into something, she dropped the bomb. She mentioned that her partner would be joining us soon. I'm not sure why it threw me off so much, but it did. She had been so friendly, so interested in me. There was nothing in our conversation that hinted at her being in a relationship. But then, out of nowhere, she says this partner will be joining us. And when I asked about it, she just smiled and said, "It's a surprise." Now call me crazy. This was more than just some innocent surprise. I didn't press her on it, though. I was too polite, and maybe too curious about what the heck was going on. She didn't seem bothered by the weirdness, so I figured I might just be overthinking things. We continued talking, but the whole vibe had shifted. It wasn't like before. I could tell Lily was keeping something back, like there was something she wasn't telling me. I could feel myself growing increasingly uncomfortable, especially as the minutes ticked by and her partner still hadn't shown up. Then at some point, I glanced at the door, and that's when I saw them. A person walked in, and at first I thought they were just a random diner. But no, They walked straight toward our table, stopped a few feet away, and just stood there for a moment. The weirdest thing. The person didn't say a word. They just stared at me. Lily smiled brightly, not in an awkward way, but like she was waiting for something to happen. She gestured toward the empty seat next to her. The person slowly sat down. I had no idea who they were, and that's when things started to feel seriously off. The person didn't introduce themselves, didn't say a single word. It just stared at me, not at Lily, not around the restaurant, just at me like I was the only thing in the room. I tried not to be rude about it, but I couldn't help it. My focus kept drifting to this person who hadn't so much as blinked in my direction. I could feel their eyes on me, unblinking, and I could feel my discomfort growing by the second. It wasn't just the silence. It was the fact that no one was acknowledging it. It was like Lily had expected this person to show up, like this was all perfectly normal. The conversation between Lily and me slowed down. She started asking me questions that felt weird. At first, they were casual, like, "What's your family like?" Or "What do you do for fun?" But as time went on, the questions got more personal, more probing. "Do you believe in fate?" she asked, a little too seriously. I wasn't sure what to say. The way she asked it didn't feel like a normal question for a date. It felt more like an interrogation. "Do you have any regrets in life?" she continued, as if she were trying to pull something out of me. I glanced at the silent figure sitting beside her, trying to make sense of the situation. Every time I looked up, the person was still just staring. They hadn't moved a muscle. It was like they were completely frozen in time, only their eyes following my every move. I wanted to ask what the deal was, why this person was here, but something in me held back. It felt like I wasn't supposed to ask, like there was a reason they weren't talking. Maybe it was because they were just waiting to see how I'd react. But at this point, I could feel the sweat starting to form on the back of my neck. It was like being on the edge of some kind of cliff, unsure if I was going to fall or if I was going to make it out okay. Lily's questions started to take an even darker turn. She asked if I believed in controlling fate. She asked about the most embarrassing moments of my life and whether I'd ever felt trapped by my own choices. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. I could feel the heat of their eyes on me, and every question she asked, I felt like I was being pulled into something I couldn't get out of. The other person didn't make a sound, didn't move, didn't even blink, just sat there watching me. And the more I tried to focus on Lily, the more I felt like that person was right there, taking in every word I said, every gesture I made. I started to feel like I was losing control of the situation. The longer I sat there, the more I realized how little I actually knew about Lily, about this partner of hers, about anything. There were no normal explanations. Everything about the evening felt rehearsed, staged, like they had been waiting for me to walk into this trap all along. By this point, I didn't know what to do. I wasn't even hungry anymore. I could feel my pulse racing, my hands a little clammy. Lily asked another question, but I wasn't listening anymore. All I could do was look at that silent figure, to make me feel small, to make me feel out of place. I didn't stay much longer. I didn't need to ask what was going on. The whole thing was a game, and I had no idea what the rules were, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. I got up, excused myself, and left. As I walked out of the restaurant, I could still feel those eyes on me, still feel that weird, unnatural stillness in the air. I don't know what their deal was, but one thing's for sure. I'm never going back to that place, and I'm definitely never letting myself get caught in something like that again. So, I had this first date with Peter. I thought it was going to be like one of those perfect evenings, the kind of night you see in movies or read about in rom-coms. You meet someone new, go to a cute little restaurant, laugh a lot, and maybe, if things go well, end up making plans for a second date. I didn't know that by the end of the night, I'd be scrubbing puke out of my new dress with a bar of soap and a sense of total disbelief. I met Peter on one of those dating apps. He seemed cool. He was funny, liked the same bands I did, and had a good job. We talked a lot, and he was easy to get along with. He messaged me first, which is a rare thing, but we hit it off pretty quickly. After chatting for a few days, we decided to meet in person. We picked a little Italian place downtown, nothing too fancy, just a chill spot. And I've been looking forward to it all week. I put on this new dress I had bought just for the occasion. It was this sleek black thing with just the right amount of class, but still casual enough to not look like I was trying too hard. I felt cute, like really cute, and I was excited to finally meet Peter. I showed up a little early, which is something I always do, and I sat at a table by the window, hoping that maybe he'd walk in and notice me immediately. When he did walk in, though, he looked a little off. Like, I'm not saying he was a complete train wreck, but something felt weird. He didn't look as confident as he did in his pictures. He was wearing this wrinkled shirt and had this nervous energy, but I told myself, it's fine. Maybe he's just nervous. We started off with small talk. You know, the usual stuff. How was your day? What do you like to do for fun? But there was this tension in the air that I couldn't ignore. He seemed like he was overthinking everything. At first, I thought maybe he was just socially awkward, but it started to feel more like he was panicking. It was weird, but I pushed it aside, trying to stay positive. The waiter came by, and we ordered our food, lasagna for me, spaghetti for him. Nothing too crazy. About halfway through the meal, Peter's hand started shaking. I noticed it right away. I asked if he was okay, and he just laughed it off, saying he was fine. But his face was getting pale, and he kept looking around like he was waiting for something to happen. I told myself he was probably just having a rough night, but then, without warning, Peter leaned forward, clutching his stomach like he was about to double over. I didn't know what was going on, then it happened. He threw up right across the table. And at only a little bit? No. Peter absolutely lost it. And in the process, I somehow ended up with most of it all over my dress. My brand new dress. The one I had picked out specifically for this date. There was spaghetti, lasagna, and what I could only guess was some kind of wine, all splattered across me. I froze. For a second, I didn't know how to react. My brain was processing what just happened, but nothing was making sense. Did this just happen? Did he just? Peter, for his part, looked horrified. He kept apologizing, but I was too stunned to even respond. I think I sat there for a solid minute just staring at my ruined dress. His face was now a shade of green that I hadn't thought was possible for a human to turn. I wanted to laugh, as it felt like something out of a bad sitcom, but I couldn't. It was like everything had just gone horribly wrong. I told him it was okay. What else was I supposed to say? But inside, I was panicking. The waiter came over, and I'm pretty sure he was trying not to laugh, but he helped us out as best as he could. Peter's already trying to get up to go to the bathroom, and I'm left sitting there with chunks of food on my dress, trying to figure out what the hell just happened. I didn't even want to look at my phone to check the time. The whole date felt like a nightmare. I was trying to be polite, so I didn't make a scene, but I honestly wanted to scream. When Peter came back, he looked a bit better, like he was trying to regain control of himself. He was still apologizing like it was some sort of relief for me. I had no idea what to do. I didn't want to leave, but there was no way I could just sit there looking like I'd been in some kind of food fight. The waiter brought over a towel for me to try and wipe myself off with, but it didn't really help. I ended up paying for my half of the bill because, honestly, I didn't even know how to react. I just wanted to get out of there. Peter kept saying how bad he felt, but I think he was just as relieved when I told him it was fine. But there was no saving the night at this point. As we walked out of the restaurant, he apologized again and asked if I wanted to go somewhere else. But what was the point? I was covered in his puke, and I'm pretty sure I was on the verge of a breakdown. We said our goodbyes awkwardly, and I got in my car and drove home, just staring out the windshield. I could feel the weight of the night crashing down on me. My new dress was destroyed. I had no idea what had happened to Peter, but it was clear he wasn't in a good place. I couldn't help but think, how did things go so wrong? 1 minute, I was hoping for a cute date, and now I was left with a ruined dress, a bad taste in my mouth, literally, and a sense of dread about the whole thing. The next day, Peter texted me again, apologizing more, but I didn't respond. There's only so much "I'm sorry" you can hear before it just doesn't matter anymore. I'm still not sure what happened with him. Maybe he had too much to drink. Maybe he was sick. I have no idea. But either way, I'm pretty sure I'm never going on a date with him or anyone else again while wearing a white dress. I don't care how cute it is. Not every time I think about that night, I just picture my dress, the spaghetti, and Peter's pale, panicked face. It's like a bad memory that I'll probably never fully erase. But hey, at least I'll never forget it. I should have known something was off the minute Daniel said that line. You look just like her. It came out of nowhere like a punch to the gut. We'd been having a great time. I mean, we were at a dimly lit dive bar, drinking cheap beers, talking about everything from movies to random things we both liked. It felt like a normal date, the kind you would expect from a first meeting. So when he said it, I was genuinely confused. At first, I thought he was joking, like some weird compliment about how we were both blondes or something. But then he kept repeating it, over and over. "You look just like Herb," he said again, taking a long sip of his beer like it was the most casual thing in the world. I tried to laugh it off, but it didn't sit right with me. The way he said it wasn't like a casual observation. It felt too intentional. I remember the way his eyes stayed locked on me after he said it, like he was studying my face, every little detail. I tried to brush it off, though. Maybe it was just a weird line. You get weird people on first dates, right? But then, after a few more minutes, he said it again. And then he kept going, saying things that sounded more like statements than compliments. "You two have the same smile," he said, his voice distant, like he wasn't really looking at me anymore, but rather somewhere else entirely. She had those eyes too. I felt a cold knot start to form in my stomach. My hands, which had been casually resting on the bar, clenched into fists. Was this guy trying to make some weird comparison? I didn't know, but I started getting the sense that something wasn't right. I asked him who the her was trying to keep my voice light, but I felt the tension building up. I mean, who the hell would keep talking about their ex like that on a first date? Daniel explained she was his ex-girlfriend. "She was perfect, you know," he said, his voice trailing off as he stared at me again. "She looked just like you." At that point, it felt less like a compliment and more like something else. I felt the hairs in the back of my neck stand up. It was starting to get weird. I wanted to get out of there, but I didn't want to be rude. I thought maybe he was just a guy with a really messy past, and he was a bit too open about it. But something told me I needed to be careful. As the night went on, things didn't improve. Every time I looked away, Daniel's eyes would follow me, his gaze intense, like he was trying to figure me out, like he was seeing something in me that wasn't even there. But it didn't stop there. He asked more and more questions, questions that no one should be asking on a first date. At least, not unless they were really trying to push a boundary. He wanted to know about my childhood, my past relationships, my family. At first, I thought it was just him being curious, but the way he asked was different, too specific. Like he already knew something about me, but he needed to hear it from me. He was digging, trying to see if I confirmed what he already thought. Then came the question that really sent me over the edge. "Do you remember what happened to her?" He asked suddenly, his voice lowering to something almost whisper-like. I stared at him, confused. What the hell was he talking about? Who was her? I was pretty sure at that point he wasn't even referring to his ex anymore. The look in his eyes, it wasn't right. I asked him what he meant, but he didn't answer. Instead, he stared down at his drink, his fingers playing with the edge of his glass. It felt like time was stretching out longer and longer, like he was building up to something. Then, without warning, he said, "I don't know if I'll ever remember what I did." The words hit me like a slap in the face. My heart raced, and the sick feeling that had been growing in my stomach spread like ice. I tried to keep my voice steady, but it came out trembling. "What do you mean?" I asked, though part of me was already terrified to hear the answer. Dana looked up at me, his eyes wide and pale, like he had just said something he didn't mean to. "I can't remember everything. He broke off, his breath catching in his throat. At that moment, everything about him changed. The guy I had been talking to for the last few hours, the guy who had seemed so charming and easygoing, suddenly looked different. It was like a mask had slipped off his face. And what was underneath wasn't someone who was just trying to make small talk or even just have a normal date. It was someone who was lost, someone who had clearly seen or done something that haunted him. I looked around, trying to regain my composure. The noise of the bar, music, chatter, clinking glasses, suddenly felt too loud. My palms were sweaty, and I felt trapped. I wanted to leave, but something about the way Daniel was acting made me freeze. I wanted to understand what he was saying. Was he just drunk, or was something more messed up going on here? "You don't have to worry about me," he said softly, his voice almost distant now. "I don't think I can remember what happened. I don't want to." But his voice trailed off, his eyes flickering up to mine again, as if he was unsure whether he should even be saying what he was about to say. "I think I might have hurt her." The words hung in the air, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. My entire body tensed up, like I was on the verge of an instinctual fight or flight response, but I couldn't move. I sat there for a few seconds, processing. He said it so casually, like it didn't even bother him, but the look in his eyes told me something else was going on. He wasn't okay. This wasn't just a drunken rant. There was something deeper, darker, lurking beneath the surface. I knew I needed to leave. I don't know why, but I stayed for a few minutes longer, trying to get some sense out of him. But all he did was continue staring at his glass, murmuring to himself about her and what he did. It was clear he wasn't even paying attention to me anymore. Finally, I stood up. I had to leave, and I had to do it fast. The night that had started off so promising had spiraled into something I couldn't comprehend. Daniel looked up at me as I grabbed my bag, his face pale and blank. There was no apology, no realization of what was happening. He just watched me leave. I left the bar, the cold night air hitting me hard. My head was spinning, and I felt a sense of dread that I couldn't shake. I didn't know what happened to his ex, and frankly, I wasn't sure I ever wanted to. But I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't just a weird date. Daniel wasn't just some guy I met at a bar. Something had happened to him, and whatever it wasn't over yet. I don't think I'll ever know what exactly happened that night, but I can't stop thinking about his words, how he couldn't remember what he did, how I looked just like her. I don't know that I was expecting Ligri to go on a date with Ben, but I definitely didn't expect it to end like this. We had a pretty standard evening. Dinner at a casual spot, some drinks, a bit of small talk. The kind of date where you could get a feel for a person and decide if you'd want to see them again. Honestly, everything was going fine. Ben was funny, easy to talk to, and had this kind of laid-back charm that made the whole thing feel effortless. Nothing seemed out of place. Not yet. After dinner, he suggested heading back to his place for a nightcap. I didn't think anything of it at first. He seemed pretty normal, and we had already established some decent rapport. So I agreed. We drove to his place, a small house on the edge of town, nothing special. Nothing to make you think something was off. When we got inside, he made a drink, and we settled on the couch, chatting and laughing like we were in the middle of any other first date. Then things started to get weird. We were talking about random stuff, and at some point, Ben mentioned something about a room in the back of the house. He looked kind of uncomfortable as he said it, and his tone shifted, like he was about to tell me something important. "I have a room in the back," he said, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "It's off limits, though. I don't usually let anyone in there." I didn't think much of it at first. It seemed like one of those things people say just to have a little bit of mystery, like, "Oh, don't look in this drawer. It's where I keep my old stuff," or "Don't go in that closet. It's where I store my childhood toys." But his face was different when he said it. There was something weirdly intense in his eyes, something I couldn't quite place. He quickly added, "I mean it. It's really important that you don't open that door." I kind of laughed it off, making some sort of joke about how I'm not the swooping type, but deep down, something about the way he said it stuck with me. I couldn't stop thinking about that room. The evening carried on, and we kept chatting, but no matter how much I tried to focus on the conversation, that door in the back kept creeping into my mind. It was almost like Ben's weird warning had planted a seed, and now every time I looked around the room, my eyes kept going back to it. That room at the end of the hall, the one that Ben had specifically told me not to go near. Eventually, we were just sitting there in silence for a bit, sipping on our drinks. He went to the kitchen to grab something, and that's when the temptation hit me. I don't know why, but I felt like I had to see what was behind that door. I told myself it was just curiosity, but I knew deep down it was more than that. Something about the way he looked when he mentioned it made me feel like there was something important in there, something that I had to understand. I walked quietly down the hallway, trying to be as silent as possible. The door was at the very end of the hallway, slightly ajar, almost like it was waiting for me to open it. It looked normal enough, just a wooden door, nothing that screamed danger or anything. But still I hesitated. I don't know why. Maybe it was the warning still ringing in my ears. Maybe it was just a gut feeling. But before I could even stop myself, I reached out and turned the knob. The door didn't open fully at first. It was stuck. I twisted the knob harder, and after a little push, it creaked open. The room inside was dark, but I could make out the shape of what looked like a storage room. There were boxes stacked up against the walls, some old furniture covered with white sheets. Nothing too unusual at first glance. But there was something about the stillness of the room that sent a weird shudder through me. It felt off. I stepped inside, my heart pounding a little faster now. The air was thick, like it hadn't been disturbed in a long time. The only sound in the room was a quiet thrum of my heartbeat in my ears. And then I heard it. Footsteps. They were soft at first, almost like they were far away, but they were coming closer. Panic surged through me. I quickly backed away from the door, my breath catching in my throat. I told myself I had to get out of there, but I couldn't bring myself to leave again. I was frozen, trying to figure out what the hell to do. Then, without warning, the door slammed shut behind me, and I spun around just in time to see Ben standing in the doorway. His face was completely unreadable, and there was something cold about his eyes. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me with this eerie, unblinking look that made my stomach churn. My mind raced and I tried to think of something to say, but my throat felt tight. Ben didn't move, just stood there watching me like he was studying my every move. It was like he was waiting for me to say something or do something. But all I could do was stand there, my heart racing. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke. "I told you not to go in there." The way he said it, with that calm, almost detached tone, sent a chill down my spine. I didn't know what to say. My mind was screaming at me to run, but my legs were like cement, unable to move. I glanced at the door behind him, wondering if I could make a break for it, but his cold eyes followed mine like he knew exactly what I was thinking. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, taking a step closer to me, his voice low but firm. Something about his presence felt off, like the room had grown smaller around me, and every second was heavier. I couldn't explain it, but I could feel that there was something much darker in the room than just old furniture and dust. Something about Ben had shifted in an instant, and I realized then that I had made a huge mistake by ignoring his warning. I had stepped into something I couldn't understand, something that maybe shouldn't be understood. Ben's stare never left me. His eyes were colder now, more intense, and for the first time I truly felt like I was in danger. Before I could say anything, Ben turned around and walked out of the room, locking the door behind him. I stood there in stunned silence, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do next, but deep down I knew I needed to get out of that house. I couldn't stay there. Whatever was going on, I had just walked straight into something I wasn't meant to see. And now I wasn't sure if I'd ever make it out. The only thing I knew for certain was this: I wasn't going near that door again. I met Sarah on a dating app like most people do these days. We had been chatting for a while and everything seemed to be going pretty well. She was funny, easy to talk to, and we had a ton in common. We decided to meet at this cute little cafe downtown, the kind that has mismatched chairs and an ambience that's warm enough to make you feel like you could spend hours there, which is exactly what I thought I wanted: a chill first date. When she walked in, I immediately noticed how pretty she was. Not in that over-the-top model kind of way, but just effortlessly beautiful. She had this soft vibe about her, and I could tell she had that type of personality that could easily put anyone at ease. I was nervous, but she was so relaxed that it made me feel a little better. We exchanged the usual small talk, ordered drinks, and got comfortable. At first, everything seemed fine. But then things started to get off. Not in a major way, just little things at first. We were talking about movies, and I mentioned how I always leaned towards thrillers. As soon as I said that, she sat back, mimicked my posture, and said, "Yeah, thrillers are my favorite too." It wasn't exactly weird, but it was like she was paying way too much attention to what I was doing. It kind of threw me off. I brushed it off at first. People mirror each other's movements all the time without even realizing it, right? So I didn't think too much of it, but then it kept happening. Every little movement I made, she did the exact same thing. If I leaned forward, she leaned forward. If I picked up my cup, she did the same. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, but it kept happening over and over again. And it wasn't just physical movements either. It was like she was echoing my words and even the way I said things. I make a small joke, and she laughed just as I did, using the same rhythm in her voice. I tried to change it up, just to see if she was really paying that close of attention. I scratched my head, and she scratched hers. I crossed my arms, and she crossed hers, mirroring every single thing I did. It was starting to get uncomfortable, but I tried to convince myself it was just some weird coincidence. Maybe it was just her way of connecting with me, I thought. People sometimes do that when they're trying to find common ground, right? But the more it happened, the more uneasy I felt. It felt like I was talking to a version of myself, not a real person. By the time we were finishing our coffee, I could feel a knot forming in my stomach. It was like she wasn't even trying to be herself anymore. She was trying to be me. I told myself I'd had enough of it, so I stood up to leave. As soon as I stood, she did the exact same thing. I swear, the moment I moved, she mirrored me in perfect sync. At that point, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I was creeped out. Something wasn't right. I gave her a look, just a little glance, and she caught it. I asked her what was going on, trying to make it sound lighthearted, like I was just confused and not freaked out. But the way she smiled at me, it felt off. Like she knew something I didn't. She didn't seem nervous at all or surprised. She just gave this small smile, like she was waiting for me to catch on to something. And then she said, "I've always wanted to be exactly like you." That hit me like a punch to the gut. The way she said it was calm, casual, like it was the most natural thing in the world. But in that moment, I felt the room get smaller and my mind started racing. I was suddenly aware of every little thing she had done to copy me. Every gesture, every word, every movement. It was like she was building a picture of me in her head and trying to be me, trying to fit herself into my life like she was part of it all along. I couldn't wrap my head around it. The more I thought about it, the more disturbing it became. It wasn't like she was just mirroring me as some strange little habit. It was like she was obsessed with becoming me. There was no denying it. The way she copied my every move, even my mannerisms, wasn't something people just do. It was calculated, like she was trying to get into my head. She was watching me, studying me, and it felt like I was just another object for her to take and shape however she wanted. I didn't know what to do. My heart was racing, my palms were swaying. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't move. I kept looking at her, trying to figure out if she was joking or if she was being serious, but there was no sign that she was anything but sincere. That little smile of hers didn't falter. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was the way her eyes stayed locked on mine, the way she was still copying every little thing I did. But in that moment, I felt a deep, crawling discomfort I couldn't shake off. I wanted to get up and walk out, but I felt rooted to my seat. She was still sitting there, still mimicking me in ways I didn't even realize I was being mimicked. As I left the cafe that night, my mind was spinning. I couldn't stop thinking about what she had said. "I've always wanted to be exactly like you." What did that mean? Was she serious? Was this some kind of weird joke? The more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't know her at all. What had started as a normal first date had turned into something that felt wrong, something that had crossed a line I didn't even know existed. As I walked to my car, I had this feeling that this wasn't just some odd quirk of hers. I had become the object of her obsession, and I didn't know what that meant for me moving forward. But one thing was certain, I would never look at her the same way again. I had no idea what I was getting into when I agreed to meet Dave for dinner. We'd been talking for a few weeks, and while we didn't exactly have a deep connection over text, there was something about him that felt different. Not in a good way, exactly, but intriguing. He was charming, sure, but a little quirky, maybe too quirky, even, but I figured it would be fun to meet someone new. We chose a small, quiet place for dinner. The kind of spot that's tucked away on a side street, the one that doesn't get too crowded and where you can actually hear yourself think. The atmosphere was nice, dim lighting, music in the background. Nothing fancy, just an average spot to grab a bite. Dave was already there when I walked in, seated at a table near the back. He waved me over and I joined him. The first thing I noticed was his smile. It wasn't fake, but it didn't reach his eyes, and that was kind of off-putting. The first few minutes went by like a typical date. Some small talk, figuring out what to order, asking about each other's hobbies. But as I started getting more comfortable, I noticed something strange. Every once in a while, Dave would look to the side, as if he were responding to someone else at the table. At first, I figured he was just looking at someone passing by or something happening in the restaurant. But then he started laughing at things no one said. Not like a polite chuckle, but a real deep laugh, like he was in on an inside joke with someone I couldn't see. I tried to brush it off as a weird quirk. Maybe he was just really animated and his mind wandered. I had no reason to think anything was wrong, so I kept going along with the date, trying to focus on the conversation. But then it happened again. He picked up his glass and made a toast to someone, except no one was sitting across from him. He just held the glass up, smiled, and took a sip as if he was sharing the drink with someone who wasn't there. My eyes flicked around the table, looking for any sign of another person, but it was just him. I stared at him for a moment, wondering if maybe he was joking around, trying to mess with me. But no, he was serious. He paused mid-sentence and looked to the side, waiting for a response. Only there was no one there. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know if I should say something, laugh it off, or just leave. As the night went on, it got worse. Every few minutes, he would talk to the empty air, asking questions, laughing, nodding as if someone was answering him. I couldn't help it. My curiosity got the better of me. I asked him, "Who were you talking to?" He just smiled at me, but this time it wasn't the same smile as before. This one was different. It wasn't warm or inviting. It was colder. His eyes didn't meet mine for a long second, like he was looking somewhere else entirely. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost soothing in a way, but there was something unsettling about it. "You just can't see them yet, but soon you will." I thought he was joking at first, but the way he said it, there was something in his voice, something so serious, that I started to feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to laugh and make a joke, but another part of me was on edge. This wasn't just a weird, quirky date. This was something off. The rest of the dinner was a blur. Dave continued his strange behavior, talking to someone invisible, laughing, and occasionally nodding as if he was responding to things they were saying. The longer I stayed, the more it felt like I was the one who didn't belong at the table. It felt like I was the one who wasn't real, like I was invisible. Every time I spoke, he would half ignore me, his focus on the empty space next to him, as if I were the one who didn't exist. I couldn't focus on anything anymore. I couldn't even enjoy the meal. My eyes kept darting to the spot where he kept looking, where he kept responding to someone who wasn't there. The more I watched him, the more I realized that he was too comfortable with it. He wasn't freaked out. He wasn't apologetic or embarrassed. He acted like this was the most normal thing in the world. By the time the check came, I was too freaked out to even think about paying attention to anything else. I just wanted to get out of there. But as Dave stood up, he did something that sent a chill straight through me. He put his hand out like he was guiding someone invisible out of the chair next to him. He motioned to the empty space like someone had just gotten up, and as he did it, I could see the expression on his face. He wasn't acting like he was alone. He was expecting someone else to be there. I made up some excuse to leave, and we parted ways outside the restaurant. The whole time I was walking away, like there was someone or something just outside my line of sight. I kept looking over my shoulder, but there was no one there. I didn't understand what had just happened. Was Dave mentally ill? Was I being played? The more I thought about it, the more questions I had, and the more unsettled I felt. I went home, locked the door behind me, and sat down, trying to process everything. But that's when I realized something. I hadn't seen the thing that had been watching us that whole time. I hadn't seen anything. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I ever wanted to see it. I was pretty excited about my date with Mark. We'd been texting for a couple of weeks and things were going well. We had a few things in common, and he seemed like a genuinely cool guy. When he suggested meeting up at a local bar, I thought, why not? It seemed like the perfect place to relax, have a drink, and get to know each other more. I got there a bit early, just to make sure I wouldn't be the one awkwardly standing by the door. The bar was one of those dimly lit spots that had a cool vibe to it. Dark wood, a long bar with people chatting and clinking glasses, and some soft indie music playing in the background. It wasn't too crowded, which was great. The last thing I wanted was to shout over a crowd just to have a conversation. When Mark showed up, I was actually impressed. He was tall, had that effortlessly cool style, jeans and a jacket, but somehow worked. We exchanged a quick hug, and then we found a table by the window where we could watch the people walking by and still hear each other talk. At first, everything was perfect. He was funny, and we had an easy flow to the conversation. We talked about movies, music, travel. It was one of those dates where the hours just slipped by without me noticing. I was actually starting to think that maybe this could be something. But then, about halfway through the night, something changed. It wasn't anything dramatic at first. It was just this little shift. I was talking about a trip I'd taken to the mountains, and I noticed Mark had gone completely silent. He wasn't even responding to anything I said. It wasn't like he was distracted. He wasn't even looking at me. His eyes were fixed straight ahead, staring out into space like he was seeing something I couldn't. I thought maybe he was zoning out, but it was kind of weird. I kept talking, hoping he'd snap out of it, but he didn't. It wasn't like he was thinking about something deep either. He just stared, completely unblinking, not a single movement. It was like the room had gone still, like time had frozen, and he was caught in some other world. I started to feel this creeping discomfort in my stomach. The kind you get when something's off, but you can't quite place it. I waited for a few seconds, maybe a minute, before I spoke up. "Hey, is everything okay?" But he didn't respond. Nothing. Just silence. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he was having a bad day, or maybe he had something on his mind. But as the seconds dragged on, it felt wrong. I almost wanted to wave my hand in front of his face to see if he'd snap out of it, but I didn't want to seem like I was overreacting. Instead, I just sat there, feeling like I was in some weird alternate reality. It lasted for what felt like a long time, longer than I was comfortable with. I had no idea if I should wait it out or get up and leave. I was about to ask if he was all right again when, out of nowhere, he blinked. His eyes focused back on me like nothing had happened, and he flashed that easy smile again, the one that had been so charming just a moment before. "Sorry about that," he said, shrugging it off like it was no big deal. Just zoned out for a second there. You know, my mind wanders. I wasn't sure how to react. Should I call him out on it? Ask what happened? But it didn't feel right to press him when he seemed so eager to just move on. So I nodded and smiled back, trying to shake off the oddness of it all. But deep down, something wasn't sitting right. The conversation picked up again, but now it felt different. Mark was still this charming self, but I couldn't shake the image of him staring off like that. It was like he was a different person for a few minutes, and whatever was going on in his head wasn't something I wanted to be a part of. I found myself looking at him a little differently now. He seemed distant, as if there were parts of him that I couldn't reach. I tried to focus on the conversation, but I couldn't help glancing at his face every so often to see if it happened again. The rest of the night was weird, to say the least. Mark was quieter than before, almost as if he was trying to make up for whatever that blank moment was. But I could still feel that strange energy hanging in the air. I didn't want to judge him too harshly, but that moment, his eyes locked onto nothing, that weird, vacant stare, kept coming back to me. And the worst part was, it felt like I didn't really know him, like there were parts of him I could never understand, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to. By the time the date came to an end, I felt more unsettled than I did when it started. We walked out of the bar together, and he seemed fine. Normal even, like nothing had happened. He was back to being the guy I met earlier, funny, easygoing, charming. But something lingered, something in the way he wasn't really there for a few minutes, and how it felt like he just turned it back on when it was convenient. I left that night with a strange feeling gnawing at me. Was I overthinking it? Was it just a random moment? I didn't know. All I knew was I was suddenly very aware of how little I knew about Mark, and that thought stayed with me long after I got home. Something about that moment felt wrong. I couldn't put it into words, but I knew it wasn't just a zoning out moment. Maybe he just had a bad moment. Maybe it wasn't as big of a deal as I was making it. But I couldn't shake the thought that there was something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface that I wasn't seeing, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. It was one of those cool, breezy evenings when the kind of dinner date you're supposed to enjoy suddenly turns into something that you wish you could just rewind. I met Chris through a mutual friend, and from the get-go, he seemed normal. He was friendly, charming, and easy to talk to. We picked a quiet spot downtown, a small restaurant with dim lights and a cozy atmosphere. At first, everything was fine. You know the vibe: casual conversation, jokes about food, and small talk about our favorite shows and music. He had that laid-back, easygoing energy that made you feel like you could relax without trying too hard. But then something shifted. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, I started to notice something weird. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but it was the way he was looking at me. At first, I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. I mean, we were on a date, right? People tend to look at each other during conversations. But the more I caught him glancing at me, the more I realized that it wasn't just casual eye contact. It was deeper, intense, almost like he was studying me. As we continued talking, it started to feel off. His eyes weren't just meeting mine. They were piercing through them like he was memorizing my every feature. I started to get uncomfortable. It wasn't the usual getting to know you kind of vibe anymore. He was watching me, not just listening. He didn't look away when I blinked or when I glanced around the room. No, his gaze stayed fixed. Every little movement I made, every word I said, seemed to draw his attention even more. Now, I'm not usually one to get creeped out by people. I mean, this was supposed to be a nice dinner, a first date, for crying out loud. But with every passing minute, I couldn't help but feel like I was trapped in a stare I couldn't escape from. It was like his eyes were glued to mine and I couldn't move. It was a strange feeling, almost hypnotic. It's hard to describe unless you've felt it yourself, but it felt like I was under some kind of spell, like he was controlling the moment. I tried laughing, trying to break the tension that had started to build up between us. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe he was just really focused. So I tried to make a joke, something lighthearted, to change the subject. But his expression didn't change. He didn't even blink. The silence that followed my nervous laugh felt even heavier and more awkward. My heart started to beat faster as I became more aware of just how still he was. It got to the point where I didn't even feel like I was having a conversation anymore. I felt like I was just there being observed. His eyes never wavered, not even for a second. I couldn't look away, but it was becoming harder to breathe. The air around us felt thick, like something was building up, and I was stuck in the middle of it. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, but that didn't stop the cold feeling that crept up my spine. And then, as if to confirm all my suspicions, he spoke. His words were slow, deliberate. I've never been so drawn to someone before. It's like we were meant to meet. I tried to shake it off, tried to laugh it off, but it felt wrong. The way he said it didn't sit right with me. It wasn't the kind of compliment you'd expect on a normal date. It wasn't cute. It wasn't flattering. It felt like he was implying something deeper, like it wasn't just a random date, like he had been waiting for this moment for much longer than I had realized. I couldn't help it. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just attraction anymore. It was obsession. I felt like he was trying to claim me in some way. I didn't know how to respond. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. And that's when it happened. I watched, completely frozen, as Chris leaned in closer, his eyes never leaving mine. My heart skipped a beat. I felt my chest tighten. I tried to pull back, but something was wrong. My body wouldn't move. I don't know what came over me, but I couldn't do anything except stare at him. It was like my entire body was paralyzed. And he did the unthinkable. Chris reached out, and before I could react, he licked my cheek. It wasn't like a playful, accidental brush of lips or a kiss on the cheek. No, it was deliberate. A long, slow lick like something out of a nightmare. The texture of his tongue on my skin sent a cold shiver through my entire body. I sat there completely still, my heart pounding in my ears, feeling like I had just been violated in the strangest way. I didn't know what to do. My mind was screaming at me to run, to get up and leave, but I couldn't move. My body was frozen in place. Finally, when he pulled back, I just stared at him in disbelief. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't even form words. I felt like I was in some kind of trance, too stunned to speak. The restaurant around us seemed so distant, so far away. All I could see was him and the terrifying intensity in his eyes. And then, without a hint of guilt or regret, he just smiled. That same unnerving grin, like nothing had happened at all. Like licking my face was completely normal. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice so casual, so eerily calm. I don't know what came over me. I felt my body slowly come back to life, but the damage was done. The tension, the unease, everything about the moment had shifted. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. My mind was in a fog. What had just happened? How was I supposed to react to something like that? I barely finished my meal after that. I couldn't stop looking at him, couldn't stop thinking about what had just transpired. The way his eyes locked onto mine, the way he seemed to own the moment, and that lick. I could barely focus on the rest of the night. The awkward silence between us only deepened the more I tried to smile and pretend that everything was fine. But deep down, I knew I wasn't safe. I was sitting across from a person who wasn't who he seemed to be. I didn't know what his intentions were, but I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't stay there any longer. I couldn't wait to get out of that restaurant. That I would never be free from his stare. I was excited about my date with Michael. We'd been talking for a while, and after some texting back and forth, we finally decided to meet up for dinner. We picked a small, quiet restaurant on the edge of town that I'd been to a couple of times before. It had a cozy vibe, dim lights, soft jazz music playing in the background, and an overall intimate feel. Perfect for a first date, or so I thought. The evening started off like any normal dinner. We were talking about our favorite movies, music, the usual stuff that people tend to discuss when they first meet. Michael was pretty easygoing, laughing at my dumb jokes, and we shared a couple of stories about our childhoods. Honestly, it felt like one of those dates that could easily turn into something more. Then, out of nowhere, it happened. Michael, mid-sentence, suddenly burst into laughter. It wasn't a small chuckle or something that made sense. It was this huge, uncontrollable laugh that seemed to come out of nowhere. I remember just staring at him, not knowing how to react. I thought maybe he was just nervous or maybe something funny had happened that I missed. But then it just kept going and going. There was no joke, no punchline, no context. His laugh didn't fit. It felt like he was forcing it, but it was too much. I glanced around the room, trying to figure out what was happening. The other diners at the restaurant had stopped what they were doing and were looking at him, some glancing at each other with raised eyebrows. The awkwardness started to build, and I could feel my heart rate pick up. What was going on? Michael's laugh didn't slow down. It got louder and more intense, like it was coming from somewhere deep, like he couldn't control it. At first, I tried to laugh along with him, thinking maybe he was just messing with me. But after a few more seconds, I realized I wasn't laughing because it wasn't funny at all. It was almost like he was stuck in this loop, and I had no idea how to get him out of it. The longer he laughed, the more uncomfortable it became. I didn't know what to do. Should I ask if he was okay? Should I just sit there and wait for it to stop? I started to get self-conscious. I glanced at the waiter who was standing by the bar, clearly unsure of what to do, and I caught the eyes of a few other people in the restaurant. They were staring now. No one was laughing. No one was joining in. It wasn't like a funny, awkward moment that we could all bond over. This felt different. It felt forced. And that's when it hit me. Michael wasn't just laughing because something was funny. Something was wrong. His face was starting to look a little red from the exertion, and his eyes, he wasn't even looking at me anymore. His eyes were glazed over, staring straight ahead. The longer he laughed, the less real he seemed. I tried to say something, but my voice was small, almost drowned out by the sound of his laugh. I couldn't bring myself to speak up, not knowing what would happen if I did. It was like time was stretching in that moment. I kept looking at him, hoping he'd snap out of it. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the silence that was beginning to feel too heavy. I wasn't sure if I should stand up, leave, or just stay put and hope it passed. But Michael didn't stop. His laugh was this constant, unnatural sound, almost like it was coming from a place in him that wasn't really his own. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, his laugh abruptly stopped. Just like that. 1 second, he was still chuckling like some weird mechanical laugh track, and then the next, he was silent as if nothing had happened. His eyes refocused on me, and he gave a quick, almost awkward smile, like the moment never happened. I don't know what I was expecting him to say, but it wasn't what came out of his mouth. He just looked at me with this weird grin, his eyes a little too wide, and muttered, "Sorry, I don't know what came over me." There was something unsettling in the way he said it, like it didn't quite fit the situation. I couldn't tell if he was genuinely embarrassed or if there was something darker behind those words. The way he said, "I don't know what came over me," felt almost rehearsed. Too casual, like he wasn't fully aware of what had just happened. I didn't know how to respond. I just nodded, my stomach sinking a little. The mood had completely shifted. I couldn't stop thinking about how he had just lost control for a few minutes. It didn't feel like nervous laughter or even like he was trying to break the ice. It felt like he was detached from it, like whatever was going on with him wasn't entirely in his control. The rest of the night was a blur. The conversation was still forced. I didn't know if I could trust what had just happened, and it was hard to ignore how weird everything felt. The unease in my stomach kept growing the longer we sat there. I tried to keep it together and keep the conversation flowing, but it felt like there was a wall between us now. He was just a little too off, and I couldn't shake that nagging feeling in the back of my mind. When the check came, Michael was back to being his charming self, paying the bill without hesitation. He apologized again, but this time it seemed less genuine. I was so ready to leave, to get out of that uncomfortable space, but I couldn't even bring myself to say anything more. I just wanted to forget the whole thing. Walking out of the restaurant, the air felt different. The sound of the city, the laughter of people on the street, it all seemed too loud, too real. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The laughter, the look in his eyes, the way he seemed to completely disconnect from reality for those few minutes. It stayed with me long after we said goodbye. It didn't sit right. It didn't feel normal. I didn't know if I would see him again, but I had this nagging feeling that whatever was lurking beneath the surface of that laugh was something I didn't want to get too close to. It started out like any other first date, just one of those casual meetups that felt like it had the potential to go somewhere. Amanda and I had been talking for a few weeks after meeting online, and we decided to grab coffee at this cozy little cafe downtown. You know the kind of place I'm talking about, the kind with the vintage decor, the smell of freshly ground beans in the air, and soft indie music playing in the background. It seemed perfect for a relaxed afternoon, and we were having a great conversation. At least I thought we were. She was cute, easy to talk to, and I felt like the conversation was flowing naturally. The kind of date where everything just clicks. We talked about everything from books to travel plans to our favorite local spots. Nothing out of the ordinary, just two people getting to know each other. Then at some point, she excused herself to go to the restroom. It wasn't unusual. In fact, it was probably a good moment for me to gather my thoughts and check my phone. I nodded and watched her walk toward the back of the cafe, disappearing around the corner where the restrooms were located. No big deal. I went back to sipping my coffee, scrolling through social media for a minute, just killing time. But a few minutes passed, and I started thinking, okay, she's taking longer than expected. Maybe she got caught up talking to someone in the restroom or something. It happens, right? I glanced up at the clock. 10 minutes. Still nothing. I figured maybe she was just caught up with something, and it was probably no big deal. But then 20 minutes passed. My mind started to wander. Was everything okay? Did she get stuck in a conversation? Maybe she was having a moment to herself. Who knows? But the longer it went on, the more I couldn't help but feel like something was off. I started checking my phone again, flicking between messages, checking for a text, anything but nothing. I didn't want to come off as impatient or weird, so I just kept sitting there, trying to act casual. But inside, I was starting to feel a little uneasy. I had been on enough dates to know that sometimes people can just bail early, but that didn't seem like Amanda. She seemed like she was enjoying herself earlier. By the time 30 minutes had passed, I was starting to get a little worried. I couldn't help but look around the cafe. There were only a few other patrons around, but no one seemed to be paying attention. I got up and walked over to the counter, where the waiter was polishing glasses. I figured maybe he'd seen something, or at least could give me some insight. I wasn't sure how to phrase it, but I asked him if he had seen a woman leave. Someone who looked like she had been with me, sitting at the table by the window. He just looked at me, kind of confused. No, he said, his brow furrowing. I didn't see, yeah, I said, trying to sound casual. I'm just waiting for someone, but I think she might have left early. The waiter replied, giving me a curious look. Well, I didn't see anyone leave, so I think you're good to go. I paid for the coffee, but it felt like the longest transaction of my life. I still couldn't wrap my head around it. Was she messing with me? Was I the butt of some joke, and she was going to jump up from behind a corner laughing at how freaked out I'd gotten? But everything inside me told me that wasn't it. Something wasn't right. I stepped outside and dialed her number, straight to voicemail. At that point, I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing. I tried texting her again, but still no reply. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe she'd just gotten busy or distracted. I spent the next few hours checking my phone obsessively, hoping she'd reach out. I kept replaying the evening in my mind. Everything had been fine until she excused herself. She hadn't seemed in a hurry. She hadn't acted weird. She just left. The weirdest part, as the night wore on, I started to question if I'd even been on the date at all. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't even remember what her voice sounded like. Had it all been a dream? A strange, bizarre interaction with a woman who had somehow disappeared from my life without a trace. And yet, the cafe was real. The waiter, the smells, the taste of my coffee, all of it was real. But Amanda, she wasn't. I never heard from her again. Anyone leave? You sure she went to the restroom? I nodded, pointing to the hallway where the restrooms were. He gave me a small, awkward shrug, and that's when my unease really started creeping in. How about she just vanished? She'd been gone for almost half an hour now, and no one seemed to have noticed anything weird. I thanked the waiter, though I couldn't help but feel a little on edge. The cafe wasn't huge, but it wasn't exactly small either. Surely, someone would have noticed if Amanda had just walked out or disappeared, right? I walked toward the hallway, now a little nervous. I was hoping I'd find her. Maybe she'd just been stuck in a line or had some sort of personal thing going on. But when I reached the restrooms, the door to the women's restroom was wide open, empty. There was no one inside. I peeked into the men's restroom just to be sure she hadn't somehow wandered in there by mistake, but nothing. It was just as empty as it had been when I first arrived. Now, I was starting to feel something deeper in my gut. I went back to the table, trying to calm myself. I pulled my phone out again and texted her. Maybe she'd gotten caught up with something, or maybe she was on her way home already. I didn't want to overreact, but at the same time, this was weird. How could she just vanish without a trace? No response. I sent another text just in case she hadn't seen the first one. Still nothing. The waiter came over, setting the check down on the table. "Everything okay?" he asked. I'd noticed his gaze flicker toward the empty seat across from me. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual. "I'm just waiting for someone, but I think she might have left early." The waiter replied, giving me a curious look. "Well, I didn't see anyone leave, so I think you're good to go." I paid for the coffee, but it felt like the longest transaction of my life. I still couldn't wrap my head around it. Was she messing with me? Was I the butt of some joke? And she was going to jump out from behind a corner laughing at how freaked out I'd gotten. But everything inside me told me that wasn't it. Something wasn't right. I stepped outside and dialed her number, straight to voicemail. At that point, I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing. I tried texting her again, but still no reply. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe she'd just gotten busy or distracted. I spent the next few hours checking my phone obsessively, hoping she'd reach out. I kept replaying the evening in my mind. Everything had been fine until she excused herself. She hadn't seemed in a hurry. She hadn't acted weird. She just left. The weirdest part, as the night wore on, I started to question if I'd even been on the date at all. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't even remember what her voice sounded like. Had it all been a dream? A strange, bizarre interaction with a woman who had somehow disappeared from my life without a trace. And yet, the cafe was real. The waiter, the smells, the taste of my coffee, all of it was real. But Amanda, she wasn't. I never heard from her again.